They say empires fall by the sword, but sometimes they rot in the bedchamber. In 38 CE, Rome was at its peak. Legions marched across Europe, aqueducts carried life to every corner of the city, and marble palaces gleamed in the Palatine sun. Yet behind these gleaming walls, a teenage bride stepped across thresholds that would ignite lust, terror, and political upheaval. Her name was Valeria Messalina, and she would become history's most infamous empress. Picture this: a girl of just 15, golden hair flowing, entering a palace to wed a man twice her age, frail yet cloaked in imperial authority. Rome expected virtue. Rome expected heirs. Rome expected stability after Caligula's madness. But behind ceremonial garlands, another story was already moving, a story that would ripple across centuries. At first glance, Messalina seemed the perfect empress. Ancient chroniclers described a pale-skinned beauty with aristocratic features, the kind of visage Rome adored. She gave Claudius 2 children, appeared at state rituals with grace, and fit the image of a matrona, the virtuous wife revered by all. But this mask concealed something far darker. Roman society demanded women adhere to rigid roles: matrona, the virtuous wife, or meretrix, the public prostitute. Messalina's fate, however, was defined not by public expectation, but by what she secretly desired. Reports claim she slipped from the palace at night, disguising herself as a prostitute in the notorious Sabura district. There she competed against Rome's most famous courtesans, challenging them in endurance, cunning, and sheer audacity. Tacitus notes the horror of senators who stumbled upon her, recognizing their empress amidst the filth and candlelight of the brothel. It was not desperation that drove Messalina. It was thrill, rebellion, and the compulsion to weaponize her sexuality against the society that worshipped her virtue. Each secret act, each midnight adventure, planted the seeds of control, humiliation, and power. She would not merely defy expectation, she would reshape the entire structure of Rome's elite through fear and lust. Within the palace, Messalina transformed the court into a theater of spectacle and vice. Imagine banquets where silk drapes swayed, golden platters held roasted dormice and honey-laden figs, wine spilled freely from jeweled cups. Senators and generals reclined in anxious silence, while Messalina presided, not as a dignified hostess, but as a master of ceremonies of her own decadent empire. Chroniclers whisper of her contests with Rome's most celebrated prostitutes, including the famous Scylla. One infamous account recounts an endurance match. Scylla, seasoned and cunning, served 25 men through the night. Messalina, fueled by audacity and hunger for power, surpassed her, continuing beyond 30 encounters. When dawn arrived, she stood victorious, not to applause, but to horrified silence. Why would a young girl raised in privilege, adored for beauty, crowned as empress, embrace degradation as a weapon? Was it desire, a lust without limit, or something colder? Historians argue it was a calculated mechanism to control Rome's elite through shame. Senators, generals, aristocratic women, even the sons of powerful men, none could escape her influence. Refusal often meant sudden death. A tribune floating in the Tiber, a noble stripped of office overnight. These were not coincidences. They were warnings. Messalina even desecrated sacred rites. Draped in priestly robes, she commanded participants to enact obscene ceremonies in the name of Venus and Bacchus. For Rome, religion was the glue binding citizens to city and city to empire. By corrupting these rites, Messalina asserted herself as a goddess within the palace, not of love, but domination. The emotional wreckage extended beyond the palace. Senators' wives humiliated in public returned home in silence. Daughters abducted from their fathers' villas reappeared days later with eyes that would not meet his. Claudius, often painted as weak or naive, seemed unable or unwilling to intervene. Historians still debate his complicity, but the result is clear. Messalina's legend spread across the empire, a curse more than a crown. Despite her excesses, Rome's machinery continued. Markets buzzed, legions marched, chariots thundered in the Circus Maximus. The facade remained bright, yet Rome's moral core decayed behind closed doors. Every whisper of Messalina's escapades eroded Senate authority. Every scandal weakened trust in the emperor's house. The ruins of the Palatine still stand, frescoes faded, columns cracked, but her shadow lingers. The girl bride became a courtesan of absolute power, a woman who used lust as policy. Power in Rome was not only statutes or marble. It breathed in bedrooms, bargained over feasts, and wielded through Messalina's body. As years unfolded, her appetite did not diminish. Secret midnight adventures evolved into a sprawling machine of corruption, ensnaring Rome's most powerful men and women in webs of humiliation. Tacitus, Suetonius, and Juvenal, each with their venom, chronicled her descent. Messalina established what could only be called an imperial brothel, hidden in plain sight, operating under the guise of wealth and luxury near the Campus Martius. This was not lust for lust's sake. It was a mechanism of control. Aristocratic women coerced under threat of ruin served by her side. Senators, generals, merchants, lured under false pretenses, were compromised in ways that guaranteed silence. Every whispered confession, every trembling secret was meticulously recorded. Blackmail secured obedience, wealth, and influence without raising a legion. The small, intimate cruelties of her reign were chilling. Young noblewomen dragged from their homes, forced to act as courtesans. Senators stripped of their togas and dignity before rivals. One soldier who escaped testified, "Blood dries, but shame never does." By 42 CE, her gatherings became infamous. Festivals for Venus or Bacchus, initially solemn, incense rising, slid into staged orgies where Rome's ruling class performed acts they would never dare confess. Messalina orchestrated every detail. Senators paired with enemies, generals into grotesque contests, noble wives unveiled before roaring circles of the elite. Refusal meant disaster. Compliance meant ruin. Her most infamous act, the endurance contest against Scylla, stunned the empire. Before a select audience, Messalina surpassed all limits, shattering Roman dignity. Her actions blurred the line between vice and sovereignty, lust and dominion. What drove her to escalate so boldly? Desire, power, or the intoxicating thrill of betrayal? The consequences rippled outward. The Senate froze under blackmail. Governors were appointed not for ability but for silence. Generals pledged loyalty not through honor but through fear. Rome's policies twisted under her unseen hand. Foreign envoys whispered of distracted, subdued senators. One woman's obsession with desire consumed the empire's leadership. Decadence breeds enemies. Soldiers, long tolerant of excess, began to whisper mutiny. Loyalty frayed as rumors spread of comrades summoned to Messalina's villa, stripped of dignity before witnesses. In Rome, humiliation could kill morale faster than the sword. The stage was set. Rome itself teetered, as if daring the teenage empress to cross the final line. By 43 CE, Messalina's influence had transformed from whispers into an empire-wide shadow of fear. The palace, once a symbol of order, had become a stage where humiliation, lust, and power intertwined. Aristocrats trembled. Generals flinched. Even Claudius, the emperor, was trapped within a gilded cage of his wife's ambitions. The imperial brothel near the Campus Martius was her masterpiece, a labyrinth of pleasure and terror. It was more than a house. It was a weapon. Aristocratic women, coerced under threat of public ruin, served as accomplices. Senators, merchants, and soldiers arrived expecting diplomacy, only to be ensnared in situations that guaranteed their silence. Every secret, every confession born in shame, became another brick in Messalina's empire of control. Messalina's genius was cruelty disguised as indulgence. She understood that shame could bind men and women more tightly than chains. The small private humiliations, forcing noble women into service, compelling senators to debase themselves before rivals, were calculated moves. Each act weakened an individual, but strengthened her grip on the entire elite. Imagine a senator stripped of his toga, standing before colleagues he had once commanded, forced to participate in lewd games orchestrated by the Empress, or a young noblewoman dragged from her father's villa, made to perform as a courtesan under Messalina's watchful eye. One soldier who survived the ordeal later said, "Blood dries. Shame never does." The palace became a theater where Rome's power elite performed acts of degradation in the presence of the empire's ultimate authority. Her cruelty marched hand in hand with spectacle. By early 42 CE, her festivals of Venus and Bacchus had transformed from ceremonial reverence into staged orgies where power, lust, and domination collided. Messalina conducted every detail like a maestro. No story exemplifies her audacity
generals
like
forced
the contest
into humiliating
contests.
Rome's
most famous
noble
prostitute.
wives
Unveiled for the entertainment
In a private
of the
gathering
attended by select
refusal
nobles,
was dangerous.
Messalina wagered
Compliance
she could outlast
ensured survival,
Scylla in
but
sheer
out of
endurance. Sila, disciplined and experienced, tended to 25 men through the long night. Messalina, fueled by a mix of defiance, desire, and hunger for dominance, exceeded 30. By dawn, she emerged victorious. But victory was not celebrated. It was met with horrified silence. The Empress had weaponized her body, transforming lust into a political instrument. She demonstrated that the very act of transgression could be a tool to control senators, generals, and aristocrats alike. Historians debate her motivation. Some argue insatiable lust, others see a hunger for power. Some point to the trauma of being married so young to a much older, awkward emperor. Perhaps the truth is simpler and more chilling. Messalina thrived on the contrast between her public image of chastity and her private mastery of degradation. The greater the expectation of virtue, the more intoxicating the betrayal became. The consequences of her actions spread far beyond the palace walls. Rome's Senate, already weakened from political infighting, found itself paralyzed. Governors were appointed not for competence, but for silence. Generals remained loyal not out of honor, but from fear of exposure. Even foreign envoys reported that Roman leaders appeared distracted, subdued, almost broken. One could argue that the empire's strategic decisions were being shaped by a teenage empress's obsession with control, humiliation, and desire. Messalina had weaponized lust against the foundations of Rome's political structure, proving that decadence can be as destabilizing as an invading army. Even the legions began to sense cracks in the facade. Soldiers, hardened by decades of conquest, whispered about comrades summoned to the villa, stripped of dignity, and made to participate in the Empress's obscene spectacles. For warriors who had stared down death, humiliation was a more corrosive force than steel. Murmurs of dissent began to spread through the barracks, threatening the fragile loyalty Rome relied upon to maintain its empire. Messalina's paranoia grew in response. Guards were tightened. Punishments became more severe. Each new act of cruelty, each doubling down on shame, seemed designed to preempt rebellion before it could take root. The more she escalated, the more entrenched her control became, and the more dangerous her empire of lust and terror grew. The breaking point came in 48 CE. A moment historians still marvel at. Claudius had left Rome to attend to military matters in Ostia. Seizing the opportunity, Messalina staged a full Roman marriage to her lover, the senator Gaius Silius. This was no secret tryst or private ceremony. Priests attended, witnesses signed, contracts were sealed. She was now legally married to Silius while still holding the title of Empress and wife of Claudius. This was not merely scandalous. It was outright rebellion. The Empress had stepped from shadow into daylight, transforming lust into treason. It was a daring escalation that challenged the very foundations of Roman law, marriage, and imperial authority. What drove her to this act? Did she believe Claudius would tolerate it? That the Senate would acquiesce? That Rome would accept two husbands for its empress? Or was it a compulsion, a need to escalate, to push until destruction was inevitable? Whatever her motive, the consequences were immediate and deadly. A loyal freedman rushed to inform Claudius of the forbidden union. At first, the emperor laughed. Surely this was an exaggeration. Yet, as evidence accumulated, laughter turned to fury. Claudius returned to Rome, soldiers in tow, and confronted the empress in the gardens she had ruled like a goddess of vice. Ancient writers describe her final moments with chilling clarity. Messalina begged for mercy, offered her children as hostages, and attempted suicide. When these pleas failed, a soldier delivered the fatal blow. The empress, who had held Rome's elite in a grip of shame and fear, died not in grandeur, but in panic and blood. Claudius ensured her memory was annihilated. Statues were torn down, her name erased. Historical records condemned her to oblivion. Yet paradoxically, the more Rome tried to bury her, the louder her legend became. The ruins of the Palatine Hill still whisper her tale. Visitors admire faded mosaics and cracked columns, unaware that beneath the dust lies the shadow of a teenage empress who wielded lust as policy, humiliation as a weapon, and defiance as governance. Messalina's story endures not because Rome wished it told, but because it could not be silenced. Her legacy is a warning across centuries. Empires do not fall only to armies. They can collapse from corruption that festers behind closed doors. Lust can be as destructive as steel. Shame can bind men more tightly than chains. And one woman, armed with audacity and cunning, can shape history in ways the sword never could. The story of Messalina does not end with her death. Her acts set a precedent for intrigue, manipulation, and exploitation within the imperial court for generations. Senators remained wary, generals cautious, and Rome's moral authority eroded permanently.